Among Europeans, there is widespread agreement that further tariff threats will not strengthen the transatlantic relationship, but rather weaken it. They also carry the significant risk of an escalation.
Customs duties are, as a general principle, paid by the specific country where the imports are being transported. In this particular case, American consumers would be paying the tariffs, but they would naturally also harm our economy, the economy of all Europeans, and especially the German economy. And that is precisely why we want to find a solution here. On the European side, we will certainly respond to such challenges with both prudence and appropriate measures. Our overarching goals in this regard consistently remain a united Europe and a strong NATO. As you all know, I am in very close consultation on these matters with our European neighbours and partners, and also with the American President. It is clear that we want to assert ourselves as a country and a continent. We do not want this escalation. We do not want a trade conflict with the United States of America. But if we are confronted with such tariffs that we consider inappropriate, then we are in a position to react. And that is precisely what we will be discussing on Thursday in Brussels. We are confronting these challenges, and you can also see that with the results and the first events of the year 2023 to 2026. The circumstances that we are setting in motion, and we must also ourselves. They have emphatically demanded a greater degree of influence over Greenland.
President Trump has justified that with the security situation in the High North.
We share this assessment, and I personally share that same view that we, as a European, and that is why we are also engaging together with other European partners. You all know that the Bundeswehr last weekend explored in Greenland what this commitment might look like. This reconnaissance has now been completed as planned. Regarding if they are part of a multinational force, we will decide at the appropriate time. I want to state very clearly, this commitment serves our common transatlantic interest. We made this clear once again yesterday in a statement by the 8 states participating in this mission. I want to explicitly state this from this very position. I have already communicated this to the Danish Prime Minister in multiple conversations that took place over the past weekend. Denmark and the population of Greenland can absolutely count on our full solidarity. We are ready to support the discussions with the United States, and the foundation for these talks must always be the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Within the European community, there is broad agreement that any further tariff threats will not serve to strengthen the transatlantic relationship, but rather weaken it. They also carry the significant risk of an escalation.
Tariffs are usually paid by those
in their country where the imports are.
We need to go. Or, in this case, American consumers would pay the tariffs, but they would naturally also harm our economy, that of the Europeans and especially the German economy. Therefore, we want to find a solution here. In any case, on the European side, we will react thoughtfully and appropriately to such challenges. The overarching goals in this regard always remain a united Europe and a strong NATO. As you all know, I am in close and constant exchange on these matters with our European neighbors and partners, and also with the American President. It is clear that we want to assert ourselves as a country and a continent. This is where it truly depends on us, and in Germany, for that very reason, we want to accept the realities, assume our responsibilities, and also lead the way forward for Germany.
Regarding Greenland, do you perceive President Trump's tariff threat as an attempt at blackmail directed against Germany and other European allies? And what countermeasures can you envision? Some are, of course, already being discussed. On the one hand, retaliatory tariffs valued at 93 billion euros, the so-called trade bazooka. Some individuals are even talking about boycotting the World Cup in the USA. What is conceivable in your view?
Yes, Mr. Fischer, thank you very much. We have been, ever since the tariff threat has been looming over us, in the European Union as a whole, but also with those affected beyond the borders of the European Union, like the United Kingdom and Norway. In a really very close discussion throughout the entire weekend, we are agreed that we want to avoid any escalation in this dispute as much as possible. We will also have the opportunity this week in Davos, in various meetings, to discuss this matter. I will try to meet President Trump again on Wednesday. I had a longer phone call with him on Thursday. We simply want to try to solve this problem together. And the American government knows that we could also react from our side. I don't want to, but if it becomes necessary, then we will naturally protect our European interests and also our German national interests. I just pointed out that tariffs benefit no one and harm almost everyone. American consumers are now beginning to realize the impact of these tariffs. The economic situation in America is not developing as favorably as the American government had initially projected a year ago. In my estimation, this also has something to do with the tariff policy. We do not want this escalation. We do not want a trade dispute with the United States of America. But if we are confronted with such tariffs that we find unreasonable, then we are in a position to react. And that is precisely what we will talk about on Thursday in Brussels. We still have to decide by February 6th to suspend what was actually supposed to take effect last year. Without approval on February 7th, higher tariffs for American imports into the European Union would come into effect. So we now have a time frame of just a few days to come up with solutions, and I want us to achieve these solutions with the most open, unencumbered transatlantic trade possible, and also with the highest possible security for the entire NATO region. And Greenland is part of this NATO region, specifically the European part of the NATO region. And we'll continue to discuss this very intensely over the next few days. I am, in fact, coordinating very closely with Emmanuel Macron on these matters. We had our last lengthy phone call yesterday. Now France is affected by the American tariffs to a different extent than we are. And so I understand that the French government, that the French Council President wants to react a little more firmly here and there than we do. However, we still try and we do succeed in adopting a common position before we enter the European Council. And that will indeed be the case this time as well. We have a comprehensive set of instruments at our disposal. We are in agreement that we do not wish to employ it, but if we are compelled to employ it, then we certainly will. What level of escalation and with what intensity? And that is then also a question of the specific circumstances as they are presented by the American government. But there is also, of course, intensive diplomacy taking place between the EU Commission and the American government, including trade representatives and the responsible commissioner in Brussels. So the discussion is progressing well, and at the end of the day, we will reach a joint decision here, which in good tradition will have been coordinated beforehand between Germany and France.
Could you please reevaluate that for us? So how seriously do you take this intention of the American president? What kind of danger does it pose? And do you also share the opinion, as with the tariffs, that Trump sometimes announces things, demands them, but then also allows himself to be talked out of them again?
I have already said this on another occasion, Ms. Hazenkamp. I take the assessment of the security situation for Greenland in the longer perspective seriously. It should also be known in this context, the United States of America once had over 30,000 soldiers stationed in Greenland. Currently, there are fewer than 200. So evidently, the threat assessment, even for the United States itself, isn't as dramatic as it's currently being portrayed. That doesn't mean it couldn't escalate again. The security situation might get tougher. Right? And since this is European NATO territory, we have an interest in protecting this area too. The observation is also quite correct that due to climate change, sea routes are now becoming significantly more navigable, and that also raw materials will become significantly more accessible. Therefore, Greenland will undoubtedly gain a much higher level of attention in the coming years and decades. But as I just mentioned, the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty also apply to the relationships between the member states within NATO. And I will do everything in my power to convince the American government not to infringe upon these fundamental principles, because that would have serious implications also for the cooperation within NATO, but I certainly see good opportunities for us to resolve this conflict together.
Mr. Chancellor, you just brought that up again. The US president would have the opportunity to simply increase US forces in Greenland, but he's not doing that. So to what extent do you consider the motives that the US president repeatedly puts forward to be credible when he states that it's about security aspects?
Well, first of all, and I don't fundamentally doubt that the American president says what he thinks and also presents it accordingly and backs it up with demands. We also made the offer to jointly analyze the security situation. By the way, the decision regarding this reconnaissance mission last weekend, which originated from the 8 states, was previously discussed in the NATO Council in the presence of the American representative to the NATO Council. So it was no surprise for the American government that this would take place. It had been announced, it had been coordinated, and it was, as I just said, begun as planned and concluded as planned. It was never a military operation. It was always a reconnaissance mission on behalf of the participating governments. So now we have to consider what we can do together. Again, I'm confident we'll find a common solution. But we must contend with an American government that very assertively pursues its interests. That in itself is nothing objectionable. But we do that too. We do this here, especially together as Europeans. We do this among the northern European states, as I just said, to which we also feel we belong as coastal states of the North and Baltic Seas. And we are doing this within the NATO alliance on the European side, jointly once again, along with Canada, who are also making the cause for our stance here. And that's why I'm quite confident that we can manage this together and de-escalate this conflict. Furthermore, a threat to security in Europe currently comes more from the east than from the west. We see the war in Ukraine. That is the grave danger to our entire security, especially the security of all Eastern Europe. Western Europe, and that includes Greenland, is currently not threatened by Russia to the extent that is sometimes suggested. And that's why I would also like to shift the focus back a bit more to Ukraine in my discussions in the coming days, because we still see no willingness from Putin to come to the negotiating table and bring an end to this war. And that is, in fact, for the security of Europe at this very moment, my greatest concern. Not Greenland, but Ukraine.